The clouds hung like secrets over the Oregon coast as I stepped from my car, gift in hand, to a house I helped buy but was never truly welcomed in. My daughter Dana hadn't invited me in 5 months. Not for dinner, not for coffee, not even to see the place. Today was different, or so I thought. My granddaughter Celia was turning 8, and I brought her something I carved myself. A puppet theater stitched with love, painted with memory. Dana opened the door before I could knock. "Just put it over there, Mom," she said, pointing to a pile of other gifts. Store-bought, wrapped in shine, impersonal. I smiled, pretending not to feel the sting. But what I didn't know was that within hours, I'd overhear something that would split my world wide open, something that would make me cancel the check. And no, it wasn't replaced with money. I balanced the wooden puppet theater in one hand and a tin of oatmeal cookies in the other as I stepped onto the stone path leading to Dana's front door. The house stood tall and beige against the coastal sky, windows polished like new, the grass cut so evenly it looked digitally rendered. A little wooden sign near the door read, "Live, Laugh, Love," in a cursive font. But all I could feel was a strange hollowness behind it, like the warmth had been scrubbed out of the words. Before I could even knock, the door creaked open, and there she was, Dana, in a lavender blouse that matched the curated perfection of her home. Her hair was pulled into a low bun, not a strand out of place. Her expression didn't change when she saw me. If anything, her eyes flicked briefly to the puppet stage, then to my shoes. "Oh, you're early," she said, already stepping aside. "Just put it there, Mom." She pointed toward a side table near the hallway, already crowded with glossy, store-wrapped presents. No hug, no "how was the drive?" Just a gesture. I placed the puppet stage carefully beside a pink unicorn-shaped box, adjusting the flannel blanket to keep it from slipping. "I brought cookies, too," I offered, holding up the tin like a peace offering. Dana accepted it with a polite, tight-lipped smile. "Thanks. I'll add them to the food table." Inside, everything gleamed. The living room opened up in neutral tones. White couch, cream rugs, pale wood floors. There wasn't a single fingerprint on the glass coffee table. Throw pillows were arranged at perfect angles. The scent of lemon polish mingled with eucalyptus candles, giving the air a sterile, spa-like quality. It didn't feel like a place where children played. It felt like a model home staged for a magazine spread. I paused near the kitchen doorway, unsure of where to go. The kitchen counters were spotless, each appliance tucked away as though never used. A tray of cupcakes sat on the marble island, iced in pastel swirls, every one identical. "Hi, Grandma." Celia's voice broke through the stillness like a beam of sun. She ran in, curls bouncing, arms wide. She smelled like frosting and something floral. Kid shampoo, maybe. I bent down and caught her in a hug, holding her tighter than I meant to. She giggled and pressed her cheek to my shoulder. "She's been asking if you were coming since breakfast," Dana said from behind me, her voice cool as the fridge door she was pulling open. "Can you help tie the balloons?" "Of course," I said, though I'd hoped maybe for a cup of coffee, a moment to sit, to be seen. Celia dragged me outside, where a folding table was half assembled in the backyard. Micah gave me a brief wave, but didn't cross the lawn to greet me. He was always civil, always a bit distracted, like he lived a few inches outside the present moment. I tied pastel balloons to white folding chairs, the plastic ribbons sticking to my fingers in the wind. Celia flitted between stations, excited and unfazed by the adult undertones humming beneath the surface. Dana called out instructions from the patio, her words quick, like bullets. "Mom, can you grab the forks from the drawer? Mom, could you rinse those strawberries? Be careful with the napkins, they're from Etsy." No one asked me to sit down. No one poured me a drink. I moved from task to task like a helper in someone else's event, not the mother of the host. I reminded myself not to take it personally, but each small slight collected in my chest like pebbles in a jar. Guests began to arrive. Neighbors, school moms in flowy dresses, dads in polos. The party swelled with chatter and light music. I stayed on the edge of it, smiling when smiled at, offering napkins, refilling juice boxes. No one asked whose mother I was. When the cake came out, a two-tiered mermaid-themed masterpiece, Dana motioned to me. "Can you cut it?" she asked, handing me a serrated knife without waiting for an answer. I nodded, careful to wipe the blade between slices. I didn't mind helping. I just wished someone saw me while I did. Later, I stood alone at the kitchen sink, rinsing pink frosting from the knife under warm water. The party had started to wind down. Outside, laughter floated over the fence. Inside, silence pressed in. I dried the knife, placed it gently beside the sink, and leaned on the counter. I scanned the room, the perfect walls, the curated affirmations in gold script. Family is everything. Gratitude lives here. I looked at my hands, still damp from washing dishes, and wondered when I'd stopped being family and become part of the furniture. The kitchen was quiet, save for the low hum of the refrigerator and the gentle drip from the faucet. I leaned against the counter, hands resting on the cool marble, trying to center myself in the stillness. The party noises had drifted outside, children shrieking over bubbles, adults laughing politely. The inside of the house, now empty of motion, seemed like a different world, frozen, fragile. I heard footsteps behind me, soft, hesitant, then voices, muffled but distinct, slipping through the hallway door that hadn't clicked shut all the way. I didn't turn. Something inside me knew I wasn't supposed to hear what was coming next. "She's going to start coming around more," Dana's voice said, low and edged with something sharp. A pause. "I can already tell," she added. Micah's response was quieter, barely audible. I caught only a murmured, "Yeah." Then, Dana again, exasperated. "I just wish she'd send the check and stop disrupting our flow." I blinked. For a moment, I wasn't sure I'd heard it right, but the silence that followed hit me like a physical force. I gripped the counter's edge. "She doesn't need anything," Dana continued, more firmly now. "She's retired. She's got her little hobbies. We're the ones managing school, mortgage, aftercare. We don't need puppet theaters and cookies. We need consistency, stability." My breath caught. Suspended somewhere between my chest and throat, I waited for Micah to push back, to offer even a sliver of empathy. Instead, I heard the scrape of a chair and then a sigh. "I get it," he said. A beat of silence. Then Dana's voice again, flat. "Let her help in a way that actually helps. Write a check. That's what she's good at." Something in me shifted, or snapped, or maybe both. But I didn't move. I didn't storm into the hallway. I didn't confront or cry or correct them. I just stood there, letting their words settle into the spaces I used to occupy in their lives. When the hallway fell quiet and their voices faded upstairs, I turned off the faucet. The drip had stopped somewhere in the middle of that betrayal. I dried my hands slowly on the hem of my sweater, then slipped through the house with a quiet grace I didn't know I still possessed. Back in the guest room, the linens were crisp, the decorative throw folded with surgical precision. There were no personal touches, no framed photos, no signs of welcome. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the wall for a long time, absorbing the absence. I should have cried. I didn't. The tears sat there, waiting. But I refused them, like an audience I no longer had to perform for. A muffled knock came at the door 15 minutes later, followed by Dana's voice. "Mom, can you help gather the wrapping paper?" I opened the door. "Sure." She smiled faintly, oblivious, then turned away. I followed her back into the living room. The kids were finishing their games outside, and parents were beginning to herd them toward minivans. The party was winding down. Celia's crown, plastic, glittery, slightly cracked, lay forgotten beneath the armchair. I picked it up, smoothed the band, and set it gently on the console table by the door. It felt symbolic somehow. Then came the final twist. I walked past the entry table, where I'd placed the puppet theater earlier, wrapped in its flannel blanket, lovingly carved, each stitch hand-sewn, and it was gone. I glanced around, confused, before I saw it tucked under Dana's arm, half hidden behind a decorative pillow. She was speaking to a woman in black slacks, the party cleanup coordinator. "Just take this with the boxes, okay? If it doesn't match the rest, we'll store it." The woman nodded, already juggling gift bags and serving trays. "It's handmade," Dana added, lowering her voice slightly, "but it's not really our style." I stood still for a moment too long. My ears rang. It wasn't the rejection of the object, it was the dismissal of its meaning, the erasure of hours spent carving, sewing, painting, all the love I'd poured into every inch of that wooden frame. She hadn't seen a gift, she'd seen clutter, disruption. I wanted to walk out that second. Instead, I turned and went back into the kitchen, taking a cup from the cabinet, filling it with lukewarm tea from the kettle. My hands were steady, my breath even. I sipped the tea slowly, deliberately, as the cleanup crew bustled around me. I watched the woman set the puppet stage near the back door with the recyclables. "Let it go," I told myself. "Let her not see you bleed. Let your love be yours now. Not a transaction, not a service." When Donna walked in next, she barely acknowledged me. "You can stay the night if you want," she said. "The sheets are clean." "Thanks," I replied, voice even. "I'll leave early." She nodded and walked away, and I knew with perfect clarity that the woman who had brought a gift wasn't the one leaving empty-handed. The morning broke cold and gray, the kind of light that makes everything seem quieter, heavier. I woke before the sun, as I often did in unfamiliar beds, my body still trained by years of mothering, teaching, worrying. The house was silent. So quiet I could hear the distant whir of the refrigerator through the walls. No footsteps, no morning voices, just the hush of a place still asleep. I didn't turn on the light. I moved through the guest room by memory, folding the throw blanket neatly at the foot of the bed, smoothing the sheets with both hands. I checked the closet. Empty. The dresser drawers were bare. I hadn't unpacked. I hadn't been meant to stay. In the hallway, Celia's party crown still sat where I'd left it, its glitter dulled in the dim light. I picked it up, held it for a second, then set it gently back down. She would find it later, and maybe, just maybe, she'd remember her grandma had been there. By the time I reached the front door, shoes on, coat zipped, the sky had begun to pale. I stepped outside and let the door click shut behind me. No note, no goodbye, no drama, just space. The cold bit through the sleeves of my jacket as I walked to the car. My hands trembled slightly, not from anger, but from the weight of something finally being set down. I didn't look back. The drive home was wordless. I kept the radio off, let the silence sit beside me like an old friend. Trees blurred past in shades of pine and gray. I traced the coast road back to my town, the silver glint of the ocean flickering at my side like a silent witness. When I pulled into the gravel driveway of my duplex, a modest rental tucked between two larger homes, I felt a strange wave of comfort. The porch steps creaked as I climbed them. The lock stuck a little before clicking open, and then I was inside. The smell of cinnamon and dust greeted me, layered with something faintly floral, probably that old sachet tucked in my sock drawer. The kitchen was as I'd left it. Dishes drying in the rack, a tea towel draped over the oven handle, a scribbled grocery list beside the kettle. The space was small, imperfect, but mine. I dropped my overnight bag by the door and went straight to the kettle, setting it on the stove with a practiced twist of the knob. As it began to heat, I reached for my laptop and slid into the worn chair at the kitchen table. It powered on with a familiar hum. I navigated to the bank site, my fingers moving automatically. The numbers appeared on the screen, steady, predictable, unacknowledged. There it was. Pound $200 monthly transfer to Dana Collier. Automatic. Next payment due. First. For years, the transaction had happened like clockwork. Never missed. Never questioned. I hadn't done it for recognition. I hadn't expected thanks. But I had, in some corner of my heart, hoped it made a difference. I hovered over the Cancel Recurring Payment button. My hand didn't shake. I clicked. Are you sure you want to cancel this payment? Yes. Another click. A green flash. Transfer canceled successfully. The silence in the room deepened, but this time it wasn't oppressive. It was clean, honest. The kettle began to whistle softly. I poured the water into my favorite mug, a chipped ceramic one Celia had painted for me years ago, its colors faded but still clinging to meaning, and steeped a bag of Earl Grey. I wrapped my hands around the mug and exhaled. Then, I opened a blank email. To one subject, support. I stared at the blinking cursor for a long moment, then typed, Dana. Starting next month, I won't be contributing to the mortgage anymore. This isn't a punishment, it's not even about money. I love you, I always will. But I need to begin caring for my own future in the same way I've cared for yours. I hope you understand, Mom. I didn't rewrite, I didn't soften. I didn't explain further. It was enough. I clicked send. There was no dramatic chime, no cinematic flourish, just the soft whoosh of the message leaving my hands, crossing an invisible distance and landing in her inbox like a gentle boundary drawn in firm ink. I closed the laptop. Outside, the clouds were beginning to thin. A slice of soft blue peeked through. I sipped my tea, still hot, still bitter, and for the first time in what felt like a long, long while, I let myself imagine what it might mean to choose myself, not in anger, not in defiance, but in quiet, necessary love. 3 days passed before I heard anything. Not from Dana, of course not, but from a neighbor named Joni, who had a habit of watering her plants too loudly and stopping by with accidental bits of gossip wrapped in casual conversation. I was trimming dead leaves off my spider plant on the porch when Joni called out from across the lawn, "You wouldn't believe who I saw rushing out of the county records office." I smiled politely. "Who?" "Dana Collier," she said, adjusting her sun hat. Looked like she hadn't slept. Had a file clutched so tight you'd think it was her last will. I paused, pruning shears in hand. I said carefully. Joni lowered her voice, leaning in. "You're still on the deed, aren't you? I remember when you signed with them. My niece works in title processing. Dana must have thought she could sell or refinance, but she can't without your signature." I felt something stir in my chest. Not satisfaction. Not quite, but something like a reclaiming of space I hadn't realized I'd abandoned. Later that evening, curiosity edged its way past restraint. I searched through my own files, thin, modest folders tucked in a secondhand filing cabinet, until I found the deed, and there it was. My name, still printed there, still binding. Half of the house, half the land. Not symbolic, legal. I poured myself a glass of water and stood at the kitchen sink, staring out into the dusk. Dana had always acted as if I had simply gifted her the house, not entered into a contract with equal standing. I remembered her tone when she first brought up the mortgage. "It's just paperwork, Mom. You don't need to worry about the fine print." And how I had signed, trusting that my presence would be welcome, that my sacrifice meant inclusion. The next day, Joni returned, this time without preamble. "She's digging, Margot. My niece told me Dana even tried to submit an old power of attorney form you signed when you were in the hospital last year. It was rejected. Expired." I looked at her, blinking slowly. "She what?" Joni nodded, mouth drawn in a grim line. "I think she thought she could use it to bypass your approval. Maybe transfer the house solely to her name, but the county won't touch it. Expired and incomplete." That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was angry, I wasn't. Not in the way I used to be when Dana forgot a birthday or snapped at me for overstepping. This was something colder, something older, like seeing someone you love break a piece of you in silence and not even realize they were holding the hammer. I made tea at 2 a.m. and sat at the table, the hum of the refrigerator steady behind me. I didn't cry. I didn't even fume. I just stared at the deed, my name beside hers, and thought, you never saw me as a person with power, just a source, just a fund. She hadn't counted on me knowing the law, or having the stamina to outweight her panic. The following morning, I received an email from her. The subject line read, "Clarification on house title." No greeting, No warmth, just a polite attempt to explain that things were more complicated than anticipated and that she might need my cooperation for an adjustment. I didn't reply. A few hours later, a second email arrived, more desperate. She offered to buy out my share with monthly installments, said she hoped we could handle this amicably for Celia's sake. That one I read twice, then closed without a sound. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one compromising. I wasn't the one smoothing edges or fixing the cracks before they became visible. I let the discomfort hang in the air where she had left it. That afternoon, I took my old sewing machine from the hall closet and set it on the table. The clatter it made as I unfolded the stand echoed like punctuation. I began to mend a curtain for the puppet theater I'd started building in the community workshop. My stitches were even, methodical. I worked slowly, not as a distraction, but as a declaration. I still create. I still matter. I don't have to answer. Donna was learning, finally, that actions have weight, that support isn't unconditional when there's no respect in return, that relationships aren't bank drafts to be drawn on endlessly without acknowledgement. I didn't need to win. I only needed her to feel what I'd carried, silently, stoically, for years. And now, in her own silence, I knew she had begun to. The flyer had been pinned to the corkboard at the back of the grocery store, nestled between a piano teacher's business card and a handwritten notice about a missing Siamese cat. Its edges were curled, the ink faded from sun, but the words stood out. Community Theater Workshop. Set design for retirees. No experience needed. Materials provided. I tore the contact tab off before I could talk myself out of it. The class met Thursday mornings at the library annex, a drafty, sun-dappled room that smelled faintly of glue, paper, and old paint. The floors were scuffed and scarred, the tables uneven, the folding chairs wobbly. It reminded me of the art studios where I used to teach, only stripped of pretense and protocol. There were 10 of us the first day. Most of the others were older than me, women in elastic waist pants and bright cardigans, men with suspenders and gentle stoops. A woman named Marlene led the class. She had a silver pixie cut and a voice like warm toast. "No grades," she announced, grinning. "No rules, just play." I smiled, but it felt foreign on my face. I didn't know how to play anymore, not without purpose. I chose a seat near the window and stayed quiet. No one asked my name. No one cared what I used to do. They were too busy poking through fabric bins and jars of buttons like children in a treasure hunt. The first project was simple: create a backdrop for a shoebox theater. I stared at the empty cardboard square in front of me, feeling the weight of its blankness. Around me, paper rustled, scissors snipped, and people hummed as they worked. My hands hovered, uncertain. "Need help?" asked a man across the table. His name tag read Dennis. He was gluing bottle caps to a tiny door frame with intense concentration. "I'm okay," I said. But I wasn't. The truth was, I felt out of place. Not because I was older or slower or rusty, but because I used to teach this. I used to correct posture, critique shading, assign grades, and now I was sitting next to a woman fashioning clouds out of cotton balls and a man drawing trees with Crayola markers. I had been important once. Here I was just Margot. No title, no deference, just another person fumbling with glue sticks. And maybe that was exactly what I needed. I picked up a scrap of fabric, velvet, deep red, and cut it into tiny curtains. My fingers moved stiffly at first, but muscle memory kicked in. I sewed a quick hem, tied miniature tassels, glued them to the shoebox. A sting. Not grand, not perfect, but mine. By the end of the session, I had something that resembled a theater. The others clapped gently for each other's creations, no one judging, no one ranking, just joy in the act of making. "I like your arch," said a woman named Beatrice, pointing to the gold-painted top of my box. "Looks like a real playhouse." I nodded, surprised by the warmth blooming in my chest. "Thank you," she smiled. "You've done this before, haven't you?" I hesitated. "A long time ago." "Well," she said, adjusting her glasses, "you still got it." The next few weeks blurred in soft pastels and quiet laughter. We worked on new sets, tried our hands at making puppets from clothespins and pipe cleaners. Marlene encouraged us like children, never critical, always kind. When someone's stage fell apart, she clapped anyway. When someone's painting ran or smudged, she said, "It's not a mistake, it's texture." I began to look forward to Thursdays, not just for the craft, but for the company. The way people leaned in to see each other's work. The gentle chatter about favorite musicals and grandkids. The way no one asked what car I drove or how much I made or what my daughter thought of me. In that room, surrounded by imperfect art and imperfect people, I felt myself begin to soften. One morning, as I adjusted the painted backdrop on my shoebox stage, Marlene came by and rested a hand on my shoulder. "You have an eye," she said. "Ever thought of helping lead a session?" I shook my head. "I'm not ready." She nodded. "That's okay. Just think about it." And I did. That night, I sat at my kitchen table and stared at my creation, a miniature theater, stitched with patience, painted with fragments of my old life. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like someone waiting to be invited in. I felt like someone who had already arrived. It was week 5 when it happened. We had just finished building miniature proscenium arches when Beatrice, the kind woman with the magnifying glasses and glitter obsession, squinted across the table and said, "You're Margot Carter, aren't you?" I looked up from the tiny velvet drape I was stitching. "Yes. Why?" Beatrice pulled a folded magazine clipping from her tote bag and held it up, her hands trembling slightly. "This was tucked in an old theater program I found at a thrift store. I thought the name was familiar." She pointed to a black and white photograph. Me, 20 years younger, standing beside a stage design model, smiling like I knew exactly where I belonged. The room went quiet. "Is that really you?" Marlene asked, stepping closer. I stared at the clipping. I hadn't seen that photo in years. It was from an article in the Portland Arts Quarterly, back when I was still teaching and exhibiting designs for regional plays. I looked confident, unbothered. It felt like a different woman entirely. "I used to teach," I said slowly. "Design, mostly. Scenic work. At the community college and a few workshops." Dennis whistled softly. "No wonder your arch looked professional." I laughed, a little embarrassed. "That was a long time ago." "But it's still you," Marlene said, eyes warm. "Would you be willing to lead next week's class? Just a short session on how to plan a set?" My stomach tightened. The idea of stepping back into that role, of holding authority again, made my heart thud unevenly. But then I looked around the room. Beatrice was still holding the article like it was proof of something magic. Dennis looked genuinely curious. No one was intimidated. They were just interested. "I'll think about it," I said. And I did, for days. That week, I spent hours in my kitchen, sketching little models, brushing dust off my old portfolios, flipping through faded syllabi from a decade ago. I even found a wooden stage I had started building during my last year of teaching. Never finished, never shown. So I finished it. Not for them, not even for the class. For me. I carved details into the columns, painted a soft twilight backdrop, stitched new curtains from an old scarf. I added working hinges, tiny light sconces made from beads and wire. It didn't matter if no one saw it. This wasn't about approval. It was about remembering why I ever built stages in the first place. On Thursday, I brought it with me. Wrapped in a towel, carefully placed in a cardboard box. I didn't mention it to anyone. I just wanted it close. When Marlene handed over the floor for the special guest instructor, I stepped to the front of the room, heart pounding. I had written a short outline, just in case my voice failed. But when I began to speak, something in me unlocked. I showed them how to measure scale, how to use lighting to suggest emotion, how even small texture changes could evoke different time periods. I passed around samples, drew quick sketches, told stories about shows I'd helped stage. The class laughed, asked questions, took notes, and for the first time in years, I felt seen. Not for what I could give, but for what I still knew, what I still loved. When the session ended, the room erupted in applause. Not grand, not theatrical, but honest. Beatrice beamed. That was better than a TED Talk. Marlene hugged me. You have to come back next week. Maybe do a part 2? I smiled, cheeks flushed. We'll see. After class, while others were packing up, I placed my tiny stage on the windowsill. The late afternoon sun lit up the painted backdrop, casting soft shadows through the miniature curtains. It stood quietly, not needing to perform, just existing, just being enough. I stood there for a long time watching it. My fingers grazed the edge, tracing the wood grain, and I thought about how long it had been since I'd created something without needing it to be perfect, or profitable, or praised. Just mine. The others filtered out slowly. I heard snippets of conversation, laughter, chairs scraping. No one asked why I was still standing there. They let me linger, and I was grateful for that. That night at home, I placed the miniature theater in the center of my dining table. I lit a small candle beside it. The glow danced over the painted walls and caught the edges of gold trim. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like a former version of myself. I felt whole. The email came from Celia's teacher, Ms. Hendricks, with the subject line, Guest Artist Opportunity Puppetry Workshop? She explained that Celia had brought in a photo of the miniature stage I'd shown her, claiming her grandma was a real theater lady, and the kids had gone wild with curiosity. Would I consider leading a one-day puppet workshop for the second-grade class? My heart stuttered. Part of me wanted to decline, to keep the quiet life I had built in recent weeks untouched. But then I remembered Celia's eyes lighting up when she saw my puppet stage, her small voice whispering, "You made this?" As if she had just discovered a secret world. I said yes. The workshop was scheduled for the following Friday. I spent days preparing, carving simple puppets, cutting scraps of felt and fabric, prepping cardboard backdrops, threading curtain rods with yarn. It wasn't elaborate, but it was magical, and I wanted the kids to feel that. When I arrived at the school, arms full of supply bins and cloth bags, Celia was already waiting in the hallway, bouncing on her toes like a coiled spring. "Grandma!" she squealed, running to hug me. "I told everyone you were coming. I told them you're an actual artist, like for real." I laughed, hugging her tightly. "Well, that's a lot to live up to." She beamed and grabbed my hand, pulling me toward the classroom. "Come meet my friends." The room was a colorful swirl of posters, finger-painted art, and alphabet charts. 20 small desks formed a lopsided horseshoe. At the center, a cleared space awaited, lined with chairs for the puppet stage. As I began setting up, curious eyes watched my every move. "This is my grandma," Celia announced proudly to the class. "She's going to teach us how to make a puppet show." I introduced myself simply. I used to teach big kids and grown-ups how to make theater sets, but today I get to do something way more fun with you. They clapped, giggled, shouted questions. Do we get to build dragons? Can we make aliens? Will there be glitter? Yes to all of it, I said, laughing, but only if we clean up the glitter after. We spent the next hour immersed in creation. I showed them how to fold paper for mini stages, how to glue pipe cleaner arms, how to use voice to bring a character to life. The room buzzed with joy. Cardboard creatures came to life. Paper stars were taped to straws. Fabric scraps became cloaks and wings. Celia's group worked on a story about a brave garden snail who saved a kingdom. She narrated with surprising authority, directing her classmates and even correcting one boy's line delivery with the confidence of a Broadway coach. "You've got a natural stage manager on your hands," Ms. Hendricks said, smiling. I nodded. She gets it honest. About halfway through the puppet showcase, when the kids began lining up to present their stories, I noticed a shadow near the back of the room. Just past the coat rack, half hidden behind a curtain, stood Dana. Her arms were folded, her coat still on, but her eyes were fixed on me. I hadn't expected her. No one had said she was coming. For a brief moment, panic bubbled beneath my ribs. Would she interrupt? Would she take over? Would she walk out? She did none of those things. She stayed perfectly still. The kids took turns performing, giggles erupting with every silly voice, every collapsing cardboard prop. The teachers applauded generously, and the joy in the room was so full, so wide, it left no space for tension. When it was Celia's turn, she stood proudly beside the puppet stage and said, "This is our story, and my grandma helped us build everything." Dana didn't move, but her eyes blinked twice, and I saw her jaw tighten. Celia performed her part with a bright, clear voice. When the garden snail rescued the princess made of popsicle sticks, the class erupted in cheers. Celia turned to me, smiling so wide I thought her cheeks might crack. I gave her a little bow. At the end of the workshop, parents began trickling in. I packed my supplies slowly, giving Dana space, but she didn't approach. She hovered near the exit as if trying to decide whether she was allowed to step fully into the room. Ms. Hendricks thanked me warmly, promising to send photos. The children waved, still clutching their puppets like trophies. Dana gave me a small nod before turning to leave. I returned it, expression unreadable. It wasn't a reconciliation, but it was a beginning. The room had mostly emptied by the time Celia returned from the hallway, her hands still clutching her paper puppet. Her cheeks were flushed with the kind of joy only a child can hold for more than a few minutes without bursting. She ran to me, wrapping her arms around my waist. "You were amazing, Grandma," she whispered. I knelt to her level. "You were the star, Celia. I just helped shine the light." She giggled, then looked around as if checking that no one was listening. "Can I tell you a secret?" I nodded. She leaned in. "Sometimes, Mom says you're kind of old-fashioned. She says I shouldn't get too used to your ways, that they're not what people do anymore." My heart pinched. A quiet ache bloomed in my chest, not from surprise, but from recognition. Dana had always been careful not to say those things in front of me, but children hear more than we think. "She says you like old stuff too much, and that I need to think big, bigger than puppets and plays." I smiled gently. "And what do you think?" Celia didn't hesitate. "I think you're real, like more real than anything." That undid me. I pulled her in close and kissed the top of her head. Being real is the best thing a person can be. Before I could stand again, Ms. Hendricks called from the other side of the room. "We've got one last performance. Come on back, everyone." Parents shuffled toward chairs, and the remaining students gathered near the makeshift puppet stage. Celia tugged my hand. "You'll want to see this," she whispered. A boy I hadn't noticed earlier stepped forward, a shy thing with sandy hair and oversized glasses. He held a small paper dog and a tiny cardboard house. Ms. Hendricks stood beside him, speaking softly to the crowd. "This is Miles. He's been working hard on his piece, and today, he wants to try performing it with his voice." There was a pause. The air shifted. I felt a stillness fall over the room, the kind that happens before something sacred. Miles looked at the stage, then at the puppet in his hand. Then, with trembling fingers, he lifted it above the curtain and opened his mouth. "Hello," he said. It was small, cracked at the edges, but unmistakable. A hush swept through the room. You could hear the fluorescent lights buzz. The puppet moved, and Miles continued. "I'm Henry. I live in a house that sings when it rains." Gasps rippled across the room. Parents, teachers, classmates. Ms. Hendricks covered her mouth, eyes shimmering. I later learned that Miles had selective mutism, that for 2 years he had spoken to no one in class. But today, behind a curtain, with a puppet, he found his voice. The story unfolded, about a boy who didn't speak because he thought his words would disappear. But then he met a bird who told him, "Some things only exist when you say them out loud." The final line, "So now I speak, so I don't vanish." The applause that followed wasn't loud. It was reverent. I blinked quickly, willing tears to stay put, but they didn't listen. They slipped anyway. Warm, grateful, alive. Miles bowed, his eyes wide, and looked directly at me for a brief second. I placed my hand over my heart and nodded. Something inside me shifted. Not dramatically, not with fanfare, just a quiet unlocking. A realization that I no longer needed to be seen by Dana or validated by some old version of my past. I was doing something that mattered, not for legacy, not for pride, but because it reached people. I was no longer performing for applause. I was helping others find their stage. And it was enough. As we packed up, Celia skipped beside me. "Miles was amazing, huh?" I nodded. "He was brave," she grinned. "I'm going to make him a dragon puppet tomorrow for being the bravest boy." I smiled. "He'll love that." Outside, the afternoon sun had softened. Dana was standing near her car, arms crossed, eyes shaded by her sunglasses. She didn't wave. She didn't approach. But when Celia ran to hug her, I saw Dana glance at me, just once. Not with disdain, not even with guilt, with something quieter, maybe understanding, maybe something not quite ready to say. And I let that be enough too. The email came from Marlene late on a Sunday evening, her usual breezy tone still somehow audible through plain text. "Hey Margot, thought of you immediately. The community center just partnered with the local youth theater. They're looking for someone to help lead their spring playset design. It's a volunteer thing, but I think it's right up your alley. Want me to give them your name?" I stared at the message for a full 5 minutes. I had no reason to say no. The workshop with the kids at Celia's school had gone better than I ever imagined. I was no longer afraid of tiny eyes watching me work. I knew now that I still had something to offer. Still, this wasn't a classroom of second graders and glitter glue. This was the local youth theater, teenagers, expectations, actual stage lights. I took a breath and typed, "Yes, please send them my name." A week later, I stepped into the backstage workshop space at the Old Town Theater, a converted Grange hall with creaky floors and a ceiling fan that hummed like a distant train. The air smelled like sawdust, paint, and teenagers, somewhere between sweat and optimism. They were already there when I arrived, 15 of them scattered around drafting tables, hunched over sketches or laughing with saws in hand. There were paint splatters on the walls, foam board mountains in progress, and a script taped to every surface. I introduced myself simply. "Margot Carter, I'll be helping with scenic design." One boy, Mason, lifted his eyebrows. "Are you the one who did the puppet thing at the annex?" I nodded. "Cool," he said, and returned to gluing a strip of muslin onto a wooden frame. No one asked who I was related to. No one cared about my age or why I was there. They cared that I could help them make their vision real. The first few sessions were chaotic. They worked fast, talked faster, and played their music loud. I had to relearn how to speak over buzzsaws and roll with spontaneous changes when someone decided their forest should actually be an enchanted junkyard. At first, I came home exhausted. Paint under my nails, back aching, voice hoarse from shouting over drills. But then something shifted. I found my rhythm again. I taught them how to hinge flats without splitting the plywood, how to use color washes to make distance feel real, how light and shadow could change the mood of an entire scene. They picked it up quickly, but what they really loved was my stories about failed productions, midnight redos, the time a raccoon wandered on stage during a Shakespeare piece. They started calling me Miss M. "Miss M, can we build a trap door? Miss M, does this curtain look like blood or just red? Miss M, will you stay for rehearsal tonight?" I hadn't expected to feel needed again, not in the heavy, obligation-soaked way that had once defined my motherhood, but in a collaborative, buzzing, electric way. These kids didn't need me to fix their lives. They just needed me to stand beside them while they built something bigger than themselves. One afternoon, as we were rigging a pulley for a flying ghost effect, a girl named Lila turned to me and said, "You know, you're kind of the glue back here, like the person who keeps things from falling apart." I chuckled. "That's mostly the duct tape." "No," she said, serious. "It's you." That night, I stayed after the last kid had gone, sweeping sawdust and resetting the tools. I looked at the half-finished set, a crooked cityscape glowing under cheap work lights, and felt a warmth bloom inside me. Not nostalgia, not regret, something else. Like I had walked away from this version of myself without realizing it. And now, somehow, it had waited patiently for me to return. It was a Thursday afternoon, 2 weeks before the show's opening night. The workshop buzzed with urgency. Foam board castles needing touch-ups, a pulley that had jammed halfway through testing, and a spilled can of silver paint that had given our stone path an unintended shimmer, the kind of chaos that made my bones ache and my heart sing. I was knee-deep in brushes, organizing them by size, when one of the students, Avery, a quiet teen with a sharp eye for color and a permanent smudge of charcoal on her left cheek, approached with something clutched to her chest. "Miss M," she said, "I brought something. From my mom." She unrolled a piece of brown butcher paper and revealed a painting, soft pastels, abstract shapes curling into the outline of a theater stage, awash in light. At the bottom corner was a scrawled note, "To Margot Carter, the woman who taught me how to find color in the dark. You changed my life." I stared at it, speechless. I traced the signature. Eva Duran. It took me a moment to place the name. Eva had been one of my students nearly 30 years ago, back when I taught summer intensives for inner-city kids. She had been quiet, guarded, brilliant with shadow work. We'd spent an entire month building a paper forest that glowed under black light. She had cried the day it was dismantled. I remembered comforting her, but I hadn't known what came after. "She's my mom," Avery said, smiling softly. "She said to tell you... She never forgot you." Something broke open inside me then. Not like a wound, but like a window. Wide, breathable, full of air I hadn't known I'd been missing. I blinked hard, pressing my hand to my chest. "She made me promise I'd find you if I ever heard your name," Avery continued. "When she saw your name on the email list, she cried." I swallowed the lump rising in my throat. "Thank you," I whispered. "Please, tell her thank you, that she mattered too." For the rest of that day, I moved through the room like someone floating. I felt light but anchored, reconnected. I wasn't just rebuilding my own sense of self. I was rediscovering the lives I had touched and left quietly behind. As dusk settled, the other students filtered out, one by one. Avery carefully rolled her mother's painting back into its protective wrap and tucked it into her bag. I remained behind, tinkering with the lighting rig, humming a tune I hadn't thought of in decades. Outside, the last of the golden hour streamed through the high windows, casting long beams of amber across the floorboards. That's when I saw her, Dana. She was standing outside the side door, partially obscured by the hedges that framed the workshop's back entrance. Her coat was buttoned too tight. Her arms were crossed. She wasn't moving. I didn't call out. She didn't wave. But she could see me through the window. She was close enough to hear me, and she stayed. I turned back to the table and began narrating softly, half to myself, half to the empty room, explaining how lighting cues were timed with actor movement, how you could use amber gels to simulate dawn, or blue for sorrow. My voice was calm, steady, as if she weren't watching, as if I weren't hoping she'd understand that this was who I had always been. Not just her mother, not just someone who sent checks and baked cookies and waited to be invited in. Someone who had taught, built, lifted, shaped. I saw the movement before I saw her expression. Dana raised one hand hesitantly and pressed it against the glass pane of the door. She didn't knock. She didn't open it. Tears traced silently down her cheeks, catching the light as they fell. She made no sound. She just watched, quiet and still, as I adjusted a lamp and tested the color wheel. For a moment, we were two women on either side of a memory, one rediscovering her voice, the other finally hearing it. And in that fragile, amber-lit stillness, I let her be. I didn't walk to the door. I didn't demand words or acknowledgement. Sometimes silence says everything. When I turned back to the stage model on the table, the shadows had lengthened. The room felt full, even in its emptiness. I reached for the dimmer switch and slowly lowered the lights to twilight. Outside, Dana stepped back, wiped her cheeks, and disappeared around the corner. But I stayed there beneath the lights I had chosen, in the room I had helped shape, not waiting anymore, not needing to be found. I was already home. I mailed the puppet theater on a Tuesday. Wrapped in brown paper tied with a red satin ribbon, nestled inside a sturdy cardboard box, the theater was crafted from cedar, sanded smooth, painted in soft lilac with pale gold trim. Inside, I tucked 5 new hand-stitched puppets, each one different. A brave fox, a shy dragon, a tiny queen with copper yarn hair, a talking clock, and a magician who always got the spell wrong. No note, no check, no instructions. I didn't want to shape how it was received. I wanted Celia to discover it like a treasure chest, something that belonged to her entirely, not something given with strings or expectations. A week passed. Then my phone rang. I hesitated before answering. It was Dana. For a long moment, I stared at the screen, the weight of every unresolved word between us humming under my skin. Then I picked up. "Hi, Mom," she said. I waited. She loved it. I exhaled softly. "I'm glad." "No, I mean really loved it. She's put on 4 plays already. Micah and I have been summoned to the living room for performances every night this week. Last night was a 3-act saga about a goose who became mayor." I smiled. "Sounds ambitious." There was a short laugh on her end. "Yeah, it was. She even made us popcorn." I listened to the sound of her voice, unforced, warm around the edges. It felt like stepping into a room I'd once lived in but hadn't dared re-enter. "She keeps asking how you made the curtains fall like that. She says they move like in real theaters." I softened. "Fishing line," I said, weighted along the hem with small washers stitched into the lining. "It's all about balance." Dana was quiet. Then she said, "How do you always know how to do things like that?" I almost answered with a quip, because I've had a lifetime to practice, but instead I said, "Because I love it. I've always loved it." There was a pause. Then, gently, "I think I forgot that. Or maybe I never really asked." Her voice didn't wobble. Mine almost did. We didn't talk about money. Not the canceled payments, not the missed holidays, not the deed or the legal tension that had once crackled like static between us. We just talked about Celia's plays, about how Micah had helped build a makeshift stage using 2 dining chairs and a bedsheet, about how Celia had named each puppet after her classmates and had started assigning them distinct voices that she refused to break, even during dinner. "She's obsessed," Dana said, laughing lightly. "She's even writing down scripts." "She has the gift," I said. "You did too, when you were young." Dana grew quiet again. "I don't remember much of that." "I do," I said. "You used to put on shows in the backyard with old pillowcases. You once made me sit through a musical about a caterpillar who couldn't sing but still got the solo." That made her laugh. "I was relentless, huh?" I chuckled. "The curtain call lasted 15 minutes. There was a long, easy silence on the line. I heard faint background noise. Celia giggling, probably rehearsing a new scene, her world of make-believe expanding by the minute. And in that pause, without ceremony, something healed. Not everything, not perfectly, but enough. "I'm glad you sent it," Dana said, voice steady. "Not the check, the stage. She'll remember it forever." "I hope she does," I said. "But even if she doesn't, she's building something. That's what matters." We didn't say goodbye with tears or confessions. No dramatic apologies or rehashing of old wounds. Just a soft kind of acknowledgement, a quiet choosing to speak again as 2 women not trying to be anything other than human. After we hung up, I sat in my kitchen and looked across the room at my own puppet stage, still resting on the windowsill, sunlight catching the tiny gold fringe of its curtains. I didn't need to be in their house to be in Celia's world. The envelope arrived on a quiet Wednesday morning, tucked between a water bill and a grocery store flyer. It was cream-colored, slightly textured, addressed by hand. The return address was official, State Department of Arts and Culture. I slid it open carefully, already bracing for a polite thank you or newsletter. Instead, inside was a formal offer letter, Margot Carter, we are pleased to invite you to join the Oregon Arts Council as a Senior Creative Advisor for Educational Outreach. This position will allow you to support emerging arts educators and develop mentorship programs statewide. I read the sentence 3 times before I breathed. They weren't offering me a one-time workshop. They were offering me a place at the table. I placed the letter beside my tea and stared out the kitchen window. It had been years since I'd imagined myself in any kind of formal leadership again. But now, here it was. Not because I asked, not because I needed validation, but because I had simply kept creating, kept giving, and someone, somewhere, had seen it. Later that day, Celia came over with Micah to drop off a forgotten sweater. She ran into my kitchen like a gust of summer, cheeks red from the cold, and handed me a handmade card. Crayon drawings of a tiny puppet stage, sparkly stars, and in wobbly letters, "Grandma, you're the director of my life." My throat tightened. I held the card like it was made of glass. "She made that all by herself," Micah said softly from the doorway. "She said it had to be just right." I smiled at him. "It's perfect." When they left, I placed the card beside the letter on the table. One from the world outside, telling me I still had worth. The other from the world closest to my heart, reminding me why it mattered. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I sat down with my favorite pen to write a few thoughts in my journal. But before I could begin, I noticed a second envelope tucked into the day's mail. This one was plainer, sealed tightly, no return address. The handwriting was unmistakably Dana's. I turned it over in my hands. When I opened it, I found only one small sheet of paper. No decoration, no preamble, just ink on white. "Mom, I'm not writing to ask you to come back, but I want to learn from you, if you're still willing." Love, Dana. I read it once, then again, slower. My eyes blurred. She hadn't said sorry. She hadn't asked for forgiveness. But in the fewest words possible, she had said what mattered most. "I see you now, and I want to understand." And that was everything. I didn't call, not right away. I let the letter sit on my table, let it warm the space beside my tea and Celia's card, and the invitation from the Arts Council. Together, they formed a kind of constellation, a map of everything I had once feared I had lost, now slowly lighting its way back to me. 2 weeks later, the Youth Theater's spring production opened. I stood backstage in the final hour before curtain, clipboard in hand, headset snug behind my ears. Around me, students rushed in and out of costume, paint-streaked and buzzing. The scent of sawdust and stage makeup hung thick in the air. "Miss M!" someone called. "We need you at the tech table." "Be right there," I shouted back, heart light. Before I turned to go, I paused. On stage, through a narrow crack in the curtain, I could see the first rows of the audience filling in. Laughter, shuffling feet, parents and friends and siblings clutching programs. In the second row, I saw Dana and Celia. Celia waved the moment she spotted me peeking through. Dana didn't wave, but she met my eyes and nodded once. It wasn't just a nod of politeness. It was a nod of recognition. The lights dimmed, the students took their places, the hush fell. And I stood just behind the curtain, not center stage, not in the spotlight, but still bathed in the glow of it, not erased, not forgotten, present, essential, alive.